Imagine trying to build an army from scratch while the whole world's at war.
Yeah.
That's what we're diving into today.
Right.
The Battle of St. Mihiel, a real turning point in World War I,
Uh-huh.
and a testament to just how determined the American Expeditionary Force was.
Yeah.
We've got firsthand accounts. We're going to break down the strategies,
Mhm.
and even a story about some pretty heroic German Shepherd puppies.
Oh, wow. So a lot of people don't realize
Yeah.
just getting an American army to the front lines,
Right.
that was a battle in itself.
Oh, yeah.
General Pershing,
Uh-huh.
he was under so much pressure from the Allied commanders.
Really?
They wanted to use American troops just to fill gaps in their own ranks.
So basically treat them like reinforcements.
Exactly.
Not a distinct fighting force.
Right.
I bet Pershing wasn't too happy about that.
No, not at all.
Oh, really?
He was adamant
Uh-huh.
the AEF would fight as an independent unit
Right.
under American command.
Makes sense.
He argued it would have a much bigger impact psychologically
Uh-huh.
on both the enemy and the Allies
Right.
if America showed up as this strong,
Yeah.
unified force.
Sure.
Of course, there was also the element of national pride there, too.
Of course, yeah. So maintaining that independence couldn't have been easy,
No, it wasn't.
especially with all the logistical hurdles
Absolutely.
they must have faced.
The services of supply,
Mm-hmm.
that's the branch responsible for getting all the equipment and supplies to the front.
Right.
They were struggling.
I can imagine.
Just the sheer scale of it all.
Yeah.
Moving men and materials across an ocean
Right.
and then distributing it all effectively
Yeah.
in a foreign country.
Wow.
There were constant shortages,
Oh, I bet.
delays, even criticism back home
Really?
in the States.
So Pershing's fighting the Germans,
Yeah.
but he's also battling red tape
Uh-huh.
and doubters back home.
Exactly.
What a headache.
And on top of all of that,
Yeah.
he had to deal with the Allied High Command, who weren't always on board with his vision.
I can imagine.
There's this incredible story about his confrontation
Uh-huh.
with Marshal Ferdinand Foch,
Right.
the supreme Allied commander.
Oh, wow. Okay, so what was the source of friction there?
Well, Foch had this grand plan
Uh-huh.
for this massive multi-pronged offensive,
Yeah.
and he wanted to redirect
Fuck.
a huge chunk of American troops
Okay.
to bolster the French attack
Uh-huh.
in the Meuse-Argonne region.
Right.
Essentially, he wanted to break up the AEF
Yeah.
and spread them thin
Across the front.
across the whole front.
I bet that drove Pershing crazy.
Yeah.
He had poured his heart and soul into planning the St. Mihiel offensive,
Uh-huh.
seeing it as the perfect opportunity to showcase the American Army's capabilities.
That's exactly right.
And that's
And that's exactly what he told Foch.
really,
Point blank.
wow.
He refused to divide his command,
Uh,
arguing that St. Mihiel was crucial
Yeah.
for both strategic and symbolic reasons. It was a bold move,
oh, yeah.
risking a major political fallout,
Sure.
defying the supreme Allied commander.
So Pershing was a bit of a gambler then.
You could say that,
Yeah.
but his gamble paid off.
Ah.
He convinced Foch to let him proceed with the St. Mihiel attack as planned,
Wow.
keeping the AEF together.
That's fascinating.
Yeah.
I'm really starting to understand Pershing's character here.
Yeah.
He was clearly a man of strong convictions.
He was.
But what was so special
Oh.
about the St. Mihiel salient
Yeah.
that he was willing to risk so much for it.
For starters,
Mm-hmm.
it was a thorn in the side of the Allies.
So,
This bulge in the line,
yeah.
which the Germans had held for 4 years,
Right.
was a constant threat.
Wow.
Disrupting vital rail lines could potentially be used as a launching point for
Uh-huh.
attacks towards Paris.
So taking it out was a high priority.
Absolutely.
Makes sense.
And for the Germans,
Yeah.
it was a key transportation hub
Yeah.
and a symbol of their strength.
Okay.
Both sides knew that the battle for St. Mihiel would
Wow.
be crucial.
Yeah, I'm starting to see the strategic importance.
Yeah.
So how did Pershing and his team approach this challenge?
They came up with a classic pincer movement,
Okay.
attacking from both sides of the salient
Right.
to trap the German forces within.
Right.
But pulling it off
Yeah.
was no easy feat.
I can imagine.
Imagine coordinating the movement
Uh-huh.
of over 500,000 men,
Right.
ensuring they strike at the right time in the right place,
Yeah.
and all this while racing against the clock.
Oh, wow.
Because Pershing was determined
Uh-huh.
to shift his forces to the Meuse-Argonne
Right.
as soon as St. Mihiel was secured.
So there was immense pressure to achieve a swift victory.
Yes,
Sounds like they were walking a tightrope.
they were.
But I heard they had a few tricks up their sleeve.
They did?
Didn't they pull off some elaborate deception operation?
Yes.
What was it called?
Operation Belfort Roos. It was this brilliant scheme designed to mislead the Germans
Right.
about the true target of the attack.
So how did they do that?
They planted false intelligence,
Okay.
spread rumors
Yeah.
through supposedly captured documents,
Right.
even staged troop movements
Well, wow.
to create the illusion of
Yeah.
a main attack further south.
Oh, so the German intelligence officers must have been pulling their hair out,
You can imagine.
trying to figure out what was really going on.
It worked perfectly.
Right.
The time the real offensive began,
Yeah.
the Germans were completely disoriented
Wow.
and unprepared for the scale and ferocity of the
Yeah.
American attack.
So the stage is set.
Yes.
The plan is in motion.
Uh-huh.
But what about the soldiers on the ground?
Right.
What were they facing?
Picture this.
Yeah.
You're hunkered down in a muddy trench.
Oh.
The rain's pouring down relentlessly.
Wow.
The ground is shaking from
Yeah.
the constant artillery bombardments.
Yeah.
The air is thick with tension,
Mm.
fear,
Right.
anticipation.
It's hard to even fathom what those young men must have been going through.
We have some incredible firsthand accounts
Really?
that bring that experience to life.
Okay.
For example, Corporal Chester Zeb Baker,
Right.
he described the march to the front lines as pure chaos.
Right.
The mud,
Yeah.
the noise,
Mhm.
the fear,
Right.
the overwhelming sensory overload.
Wow. It's a stark reminder of the human cost of war.
Yeah.
These were mostly young men,
Right.
many of whom had never even left their hometowns before, suddenly thrust into this terrifying,
Yes.
unfamiliar world.
And for many of them,
Yeah.
St. Mihiel would be their first taste of combat,
Right.
a baptism by fire, to say the least. Yeah.
Yeah.
St. Mihiel was a big victory,
Yeah.
but it was really just the warm-up for
Okay.
the Americans.
Right.
What came next was the Meuse-Argonne offensive.
Ah, yes. The Meuse are
Good
gone.
40s.
I've read about those battles.
Grueling days of fighting.
Yeah. Wasn't that the largest and deadliest offensive
It was.
in American history up to that point?
Absolutely.
Right.
And remember,
Yeah.
Pershing had made that promise to Foch
Right.
to move his forces to this sector
Uh-huh.
immediately after St. Mihiel.
Right.
It was a massive logistical undertaking.
Yeah. Trying to move that many men and equipment in the dark, trying to stay quiet,
Yes.
it boggles the mind.
It does.
How did they manage to pull that off?
It was a testament to the combined efforts
Okay.
of both American and French logistics teams.
So they worked together.
They did.
Wow.
They worked tirelessly behind the scenes,
Uh,
planning meticulously,
Good.
coordinating movements,
yeah.
utilizing every available resource.
It sounds like a logistical nightmare.
It was a Herculean effort.
So they arrive at the Meuse-Argonne region,
Yes,
exhausted, but ready for the next fight.
they were.
What kind of landscape are we talking about here?
Think dense forests,
Okay.
steep hills,
Yeah.
and a network of ravines and gullies.
Right.
It was a defender's dream.
Clearly.
And the Germans had been fortifying this area for years,
Ow.
creating this layered defense system.
Okay.
Trenches, barbed wire, machine gun nests,
Uh-huh.
concrete bunkers.
It sounds like an absolute fortress.
It was.
Wow.
And to make matters worse, heavy rains had turned the ground into a muddy quagmire.
Oh, no.
Movement was incredibly difficult,
Right.
and the conditions for the soldiers were just miserable.
Yeah.
It was a recipe for a brutal,
Wow.
drawn-out fight.
And right in the heart of this defensive maze was Montfaucon, right?
Exactly.
That infamous Mount of the Falcon.
That's right.
So it was a prime target for both sides.
Absolutely.
Makes sense.
The Germans had turned Montfaucon into a fortress
Okay.
with thick concrete walls,
Uh-huh.
artillery emplacements,
Wow.
and a network of underground tunnels.
So how did the Americans approach this seemingly impregnable position?
Right. A full frontal assault.
Pershing knew a frontal assault would be incredibly costly,
Yeah, I bet.
but he also needed to maintain momentum
Uh-huh.
from St. Mihiel
Right.
and keep the pressure on the Germans.
So he opted for a rapid attack.
Yeah, he opted for a rapid attack.
Hoping to overwhelm the enemy before they could fully organize their defenses.
That's right.
It was a calculated risk.
It was.
A lot riding on speed and the element of surprise.
Definitely.
And so on September 26, 1918, at 5:30 in the morning,
Yes.
after a massive artillery barrage,
Right.
the Meuse-Argonne offensive began.
It did.
Wow, I can't imagine the chaos and confusion.
It was a brutal fight.
Yeah.
Visibility was limited, communication was difficult,
Right.
and the terrain was treacherous.
Oh, yeah.
The Americans faced intense machine gun fire,
Wow.
artillery barrages,
Right.
and even poison gas attacks.
They're also up against some of Germany's best divisions.
They were.
Seasoned veterans, no doubt.
Yeah. So how did the Americans fare against such determined resistance?
Right.
Were they able to take Montfaucon?
The task of capturing Montfaucon
Okay.
fell to the 79th Division,
Uh-huh.
known as the Cross of Lorraine Division.
Oh.
They faced incredibly fierce resistance,
Yeah.
but after a grueling 2-day battle,
Right.
they managed to seize the summit.
That must have been a huge boost for American morale.
It was a significant victory.
I bet.
Capturing Montfaucon
Yeah.
deprived the Germans of a crucial observation post
Uh-huh.
and gave the Americans a vital foothold in their defenses.
Okay.
But the battle was far from over.
Right.
The Meuse-Argonne offensive would drag on for weeks,
Wow.
turning into a brutal war of attrition.
It's hard to imagine the toll that such prolonged and intense fighting must have taken on the soldiers.
It was a horrific experience.
Yeah.
Both sides suffered heavy casualties,
Right.
and the fighting was often hand-to-hand,
Really.
incredibly brutal and personal.
Wow.
There were countless acts of bravery and sacrifice
I bet.
on both sides.
Yeah.
Stories that really highlight the human drama
Yeah.
that unfolds amidst the larger narratives of war.
Are there any stories from the Meuse-Argonne that particularly stand out to you?
There are so many.
Yeah.
But the story of the Lost Battalion
Okay.
is particularly remarkable.
What's that?
This was a group of over 500 men
Okay.
from the 77th Division
Right.
who were cut off
Oh,
and surrounded by German forces.
so they were completely trapped with no way out.
They were
Wow.
for 6 days.
Uh-huh.
They held their position,
Okay.
repelling wave after wave of German attacks.
Wow.
They were low on food,
Oh, no.
water, ammunition.
Right.
Their ranks were riddled with wounded,
Oh, gosh.
but they refused to surrender.
The sheer desperation of their situation is difficult to comprehend.
Their commander,
Yeah.
Major Charles Whittlesey,
Uh-huh.
famously refused a German demand to surrender,
Wow.
reportedly saying,
Oh,
"Go to hell."
what a defiant response. He was determined to fight to the bitter end.
He was.
Yeah.
The Lost Battalion became a symbol of American resilience and
Right.
fighting spirit.
Wow.
They were eventually rescued,
Oh.
but only after suffering heavy losses.
Oh, wow.
Their story is a stark reminder
Uh-huh.
of the incredible courage and endurance
Right.
displayed by so many soldiers.
During the Meuse-Argonne offensive,
Exactly.
it certainly puts things into perspective.
It does.
It wasn't just about grand strategies and famous generals.
Right.
It was the bravery and sacrifice
Yeah.
of thousands of ordinary soldiers
Uh-huh.
that ultimately won the day.
Absolutely.
And it's important to remember
Yeah.
that the Meuse-Argonne was just one part
Right.
of a much larger Allied offensive
Yes.
happening across the Western Front at that time.
That's right.
The British and French were also launching major attacks,
They were.
putting immense pressure on the German army from all sides. So it was a coordinated effort,
It was.
a final push
Right.
to break through the German lines.
Yes.
It sounds like the Germans were starting to crumble under this relentless pressure.
They were.
In what ways?
Their morale was plummeting.
Okay.
Their resources were dwindling.
Mm-hmm.
And desertions were becoming increasingly common.
Wow.
The once mighty German army was on the verge of collapse.
So the stage was set for the final act of the war.
Exactly.
Oh.
But before we dive into that dramatic conclusion,
Okay.
I think it's worth taking a moment to consider
Right.
the broader implications
Uh-huh.
of the Meuse-Argonne offensive,
Okay.
both for the American military
Oh,
and
yeah.
for America's role in the world.
Okay, let's do that. Because it seems like the Meuse-Argonne was more than just a battle.
Right.
It was a turning point in American history.
I agree. The
Yeah.
sheer scale of the battle,
Right.
the casualties involved,
Uh-huh.
the challenges overcome,
Yeah.
all of that had a profound impact on the American
Yeah.
military and the nation's psyche.
In what ways?
Well, for one thing,
Uh-huh.
it demonstrated America's willingness
Okay.
to commit significant resources and manpower
Right.
to a global conflict.
Yeah.
It solidified America's position as a major military power
Makes sense.
on the world stage.
It was a coming-of-age moment for the American military.
Precisely.
And it also had a significant impact
Right.
on the development of American military doctrine and tactics.
It did. The
Wow.
challenges of fighting in such difficult terrain
Yeah.
against a well-entrenched enemy
Uh-huh.
forced the Americans to adapt and innovate.
So they had to come up with new ideas.
They did.
Wow.
They experimented with new technologies like tanks and aircraft and developed new tactics
Right.
for coordinating infantry, artillery, and air support.
So the lessons learned in the trenches of the Meuse-Argonne
Yes.
would shape the future of the American military.
Absolutely.
Right.
And these lessons extended beyond the purely military realm. Okay.
The Meuse-Argonne also had a profound impact
Right.
on American society and culture.
You must have.
It did.
Yeah.
It exposed a generation of young Americans
No.
to the horrors of modern warfare,
Right.
shaping their views on war
Okay.
and the role of the United States in the world.
Their experiences would be reflected in literature, art, and film for decades to come.
Ah,
The Meuse-Argonne left an indelible mark
it did.
on the American psyche,
Yeah,
and its legacy continues to resonate today.
it does.
Wow, it was a brutal and costly victory.
It was.
But it also marked the emergence of the United States as a global power.
Exactly.
So the Meuse-Argonne offensive,
Right.
for all its brutality and sacrifice, was a pivotal moment in
Yeah.
American history.
It was.
It reshaped the American military,
Yes.
thrust America onto the world stage,
Mhm.
and left a lasting impact on American society and culture.
Absolute.
But as we know,
Right.
the war wasn't over yet. No, it wasn't.
The final chapter was about to unfold.
It was.
What did that final push to victory look like?
Yeah,
So the Meuse-Argonne marked a turning point,
it did.
but the war wasn't over yet.
Right.
What did that final push to victory look like?
Well, by late October 1918,
Okay.
the German war machine was grinding to a halt.
Really?
Their armies were exhausted, their
Mhm.
resources were depleted,
Right.
and the people back home, they
Yeah.
were desperate for peace.
And the Allies, sensing victory, kept up the pressure.
Absolutely.
Right.
The combined force of the Americans,
Hmm.
British, French,
Right.
and other Allied forces. It
Yeah.
was just too powerful for Germany to withstand.
But even facing defeat, I imagine the Germans weren't going down without a fight.
You're right.
Yeah.
There were still pockets of fierce resistance,
Oh, yeah.
and battles raged on along the front lines.
Right.
But the writing was on the wall.
So what was happening within Germany at this point? Were they starting to unravel from the inside? How so?
The Kaiser's authority was crumbling.
Okay.
There were widespread calls for peace.
Mhm.
There were even mutinies in the Navy.
Wow.
And civilian protests demanding an end to the war
Really?
were spreading across the country.
It sounds like the whole German war effort was collapsing.
It was.
So how did it all finally come to an end?
Right.
What led to the armistice?
It was a combination of factors.
Like what?
Well, the relentless Allied offensives had taken their toll.
Okay.
German morale had plummeted,
Uh-huh.
and the political situation back home was in turmoil.
Right.
All of this pushed them to seek an armistice.
And the armistice was signed in a rather unusual location, wasn't it?
It was.
Where was that?
It wasn't signed in some grand palace or
Okay.
government building.
Right.
It happened in a railway carriage
Railway carriage.
in the forest of Compiègne in France.
That's interesting.
Yeah, it was a specially designated carriage,
Okay.
chosen as neutral ground.
I see.
And on November 11th, 1918, at 5:00 a.m.
Representatives from both sides met there
Right.
to sign the armistice,
Ah,
officially bringing the fighting to an end.
what a moment that must have been
It
after
was.
4 long years of devastating war.
Yeah.
Silence finally fell across the battlefields of Europe.
It was a moment of immense relief,
I bet.
but also of profound sorrow.
Of course.
Millions had died.
Right.
Entire nations were shattered,
Mhm.
and the world was forever changed
Yeah.
by the experience of the Great War.
For the American soldiers who had entered the war relatively late,
Yeah.
it must have been a bittersweet victory.
It was.
Yeah.
They had proven their strength and courage,
Right.
but at a tremendous cost.
Yeah.
Over 116,000 American soldiers died in the war.
Wow.
And many more carried the physical and emotional scars of their experiences.
It's a sobering reminder of the true cost of war.
It is.
But amidst the grief and loss,
Right.
there was also a sense of hope.
There was.
People believed that the sacrifices made
would lead to a better future.
Right.
There was this idea that the Great War had been the war to end all wars.
Yeah, unfortunately, as we know, that hope wouldn't last.
Sadly, you're right.
Yeah.
The seeds of future conflict were already sown.
They were.
And the world would face an even more devastating war
Right.
just 2 decades later.
That's true.
So as we wrap up this deep dive
Okay.
into the Battle of St. Mihiel and the closing months of World War I,
Yeah.
what are some key takeaways?
I think it's important to remember the incredible sacrifices made by those who fought in this conflict.
Absolutely.
The Battle of St. Mihiel was a pivotal moment for the American Army,
It was.
a testament to their strength and determination.
Right.
It was also a learning experience, one that shaped the future of the American military.
It did.
But most importantly, we should never forget the human cost of war.
We've explored stories of courage,
Right.
resilience, and the tragedy of war. And these stories really bring home the enduring impact of this conflict.
They do.
And it's crucial to remember
Yeah.
that the end of the war didn't bring an end to the suffering.
No, it didn't.
The physical and emotional scars lingered, and the world faced the daunting task of rebuilding and healing.
Absolutely.
And as you mentioned earlier,
Yeah.
the peace that followed was fragile
Right.
and ultimately unsustainable.
It's a sobering thought.
It is.
Yeah, it underscores the importance of understanding history, not just as a collection of dates and battles,
Right.
but as a complex tapestry
Yeah.
of human experiences, choices, and consequences.
Learning from the past, we can hopefully create a more peaceful future.
Exactly.
Well said.
And I hope this deep dive has sparked a desire to learn more about this pivotal period in history.
I think it has.
There are so many stories waiting to be discovered, stories that illuminate the human experience of war, the complexities of leadership, and the enduring legacy of the Great War.
If you enjoyed this deep dive, be sure to subscribe to The Deep Dive.
Yes.
We'll continue to bring you fascinating stories from the past,
We will.
revealing the unexpected ways that history has shaped our world.
Absolutely.
Until next time, keep exploring.
Keep exploring.